G20 major economies.
The Group of 20 Finance Ministers and Central Bank Governors is a group of finance ministers and central bank governors from 20 major economies. The members, shown highlighted on the map at right, include 19 individual countries: Argentina, Australia, Brazil, Canada, China, France, Germany, India, Indonesia, Italy, Japan, Republic of Korea, Mexico, Russian Federation, Saudi Arabia, South Africa, Turkey, United Kingdom, United States, and the European Union, with Spain participating as a permanent guest, and further short-term guests named annually by the group's rotating chairperson. The EU is represented by the President of the European Council and by the European Central Bank. Collectively, the G20 economies account for around 85% of the gross world product, GWP, 80% of world trade, or if excluding EU intra-trade, 75%, and two-thirds of the world population. The G20 heads of government or heads of state have also periodically conferred at summits since their initial meeting in 2008. The G20 was proposed by former Canadian Prime Minister Paul Martin as a forum for cooperation and consultation on matters pertaining to the international financial system. The group was formally inaugurated in September 1999, and held its first meeting in December 1999. It studies, reviews, and promotes high-level discussion of policy issues pertaining to the promotion of international financial stability, and seeks to address issues that go beyond the responsibilities of any one organization. With the G20 growing in stature after the 2008 Washington summit, its leaders announced on September 25, 2009, that the group would replace the G8 as the main economic council of wealthy nations. Since its inception, the G20's membership policies have been criticized by numerous intellectuals, and its summits have been a focus for major protests by anti-globalists, nationalists and others. The heads of the G20 nations met semi-annually at G20 summits between 2008 and 2011. Since the November 2011 Cannes summit, all G20 summits have been held annually. Russia currently holds the chair of the G20, and hosted the 8th G20 summit in September 2013. The next summit is in Australia in Brisbane in 2014, chaired by Tony Abbott, Prime Minister of Australia.
History.
The G20, which superseded the G33, which had itself superseded the G22, was foreshadowed at the Cologne summit of the G7 in June 1999, but was only formally established at the G7 finance ministers meeting on September 26, 1999. The inaugural meeting took place on 15 to 16 December 1999 in Berlin. In 2008, Spain and the Netherlands were included, by French invitation, in the G20 Leaders Summit on Financial Markets and the World Economy. The theme of the 2006 G20 meeting was Building and Sustaining Prosperity. The issues discussed included domestic reforms to achieve sustained growth, global energy and resource commodity markets, reform of the World Bank and IMF, and the impact of demographic changes due to an aging population. Trevor A. Manuel, the South African Minister of Finance, was the chairperson of the G20 when South Africa hosted the Secretariat in 2007. Guido Mantega, Brazil's Minister of Finance, was the chairperson of the G20 in 2008. Brazil proposed dialogue on competition in financial markets, clean energy and economic development and fiscal elements of growth and development. In a statement following a meeting of G7 finance ministers on October 11, 2008, U.S. President George W. Bush stated that the next meeting of the G20 would be important in finding solutions to the burgeoning economic crisis of 2008. An initiative by French President Nicolas Sarkozy and British Prime Minister Gordon Brown led to a special meeting of the G20, a G20 Leaders Summit on Financial Markets and the World Economy, on November 15, 2008. Despite lacking any formal ability to enforce rules, the G20's prominent membership gives it a strong input on global policy. However, there remain disputes over the legitimacy of the G20, and criticisms of its organization and the efficacy of its declarations.
Summits.
The G20 summit was created as a response both to the financial crisis of 2007 to 2010 and to a growing recognition that key emerging countries were not adequately included in the core of global economic discussion and governance. The G20 summits of heads of state or government were held in addition to the G20 meetings of finance ministers and central bank governors, who continued to meet to prepare the Leaders' Summit and implement their decisions. After the 2008 debut summit in Washington, D.C., G20 leaders met twice a year in London and Pittsburgh in 2009, Toronto and Seoul in 2010. Since 2011, when France chaired and hosted the G20, the summits have been held only once a year. Russia chaired and hosted the summit in 2013. While the summit will be held in Australia in 2014, with Turkey hosting it in 2015. Australian Foreign Minister Julie Bishop, as host of the then next G20 meeting, proposed on March 19, 2014 to ban Russia over its role in the 2014 Crimean crisis. She was reminded on March 24 by a communique of the BRICS foreign ministers that the ministers noted with concern the recent media statement on the forthcoming G20 summit to be held in Brisbane in November 2014. The custodianship of the G20 belongs to all member states equally and no one member state can unilaterally determine its nature and character.
G20 leaders chair rotation.
To decide which member nation gets to chair the G20 leaders meeting for a given year, all 19 sovereign nations are assigned to one of 5 different groupings. Each group holds a maximum of 4 nations. This system has been in place since 2010. When South Korea, which is in Group 5, held the G20 chair. In 2013, Russia, which is in Group 2, hosted the G20 Leaders Summit. Australia, the host of the 2014 G20 Summit, is in Group 1. The table below lists the nations' groupings.
Organization.
The G20 operates without a permanent secretariat or staff. The group's chair rotates annually among the members and is selected from a different regional grouping of countries. The chair is part of a revolving 3-member management group of past, present and future chairs, referred to as the Troika. The incumbent chair establishes a temporary secretariat for the duration of its term, which coordinates the group's work and organizes its meetings. The role of the Troika is to ensure continuity in the G20's work and management across host years. The current chair of the G20 is Australia. The chair was handed over from Russia after the 2013 G20 summit. The 2015 summit will be presided by Turkey.
Proposed permanent secretariat.
In 2010, President of France Nicolas Sarkozy proposed the establishment of a permanent G20 secretariat, similar to the United Nations. Seoul and Paris were suggested as possible locations for its headquarters. China and Brazil supported the establishment of a secretariat, while Italy and Japan expressed opposition to the proposal. South Korea proposed a cyber secretariat as an alternative.
List of members.
Currently, there are 20 members of the group. These include, at the leaders' summits, the leaders of 19 countries and of the European Union, and, at the ministerial level meetings, the finance ministers and central bank governors of 19 countries and of the European Union. In addition, Spain participates in every meeting as a permanent guest. The first of the tables below lists the member entities and their heads of government, finance ministers and central bank governors. The second table lists relevant statistics such as population and GDP figures for each member, as well as detailing memberships of other international organizations, such as the G7, BRICS or MIKTA. Total GDP figures are given in millions of US dollars.
Member country data.
In addition to these 20 members, the chief executive officers of several other international forums and institutions participate in meetings of the G20. These include the Managing Director and Chairman of the International Monetary Fund, the President of the World Bank, the International Monetary and Financial Committee and the Chairman of the Development Assistance Committee. The G20's membership does not reflect exactly the 19 largest national economies of the world in any given year. The organization states, all 19 member nations are among the top 33 economies as measured in GDP at nominal prices in a list published by the International Monetary Fund, IMF, for 2013. Not represented by membership in the G20 are Switzerland, ranked 20th by the IMF, Norway, 23, Taiwan, 25, United Arab Emirates, 28, Thailand, 29, Colombia, 30, Venezuela, 31, and Iran, 32, even though they rank higher than some members. Spain, 13, the Netherlands, 18, Sweden, 21, Poland, 22, Belgium, 24, and Austria, 27, are included only as part of the EU, and not independently. When the country's GDP is measured at purchasing power parity, PPP, rates, all 19 members are among the top 25 in the world on April 2014, according to the IMF. Iran, 18, Taiwan, 20, and Thailand, 24, are not G20 members, while Spain, 14, Poland, 21, and the Netherlands, 23, are only included in the EU slot. However, in a list of average GDP, calculated for the years since the group's creation, 1999 to 2008, at both nominal and PPP rates, only Spain, the Netherlands, Poland, Taiwan, Thailand and Iran appear above any G20 member in both lists simultaneously. Spain, being the 13th largest economy in the world and 5th in the European Union in terms of nominal GDP, is a permanent guest of the organization, although the Spanish government's policy is to not request official membership. As such, a Spanish delegation has been invited to, and has attended, every G20 heads of state summit since the G20's inception.
Role of Asian countries.
A 2011 report released by the Asian Development Bank, ADB, predicted that large Asian economies such as China and India would play a more important role in global economic governance in the future. The report claimed that the rise of emerging market economies heralded a new world order, in which the G20 would become the global economic steering committee. The ADB furthermore noted that Asian countries had led the global recovery following the late 2000s recession. It predicted that the region would have a greater presence on the global stage, shaping the G20's agenda for balanced and sustainable growth through strengthening intra-regional trade and stimulating domestic demand.
Invitees.
Typically, several countries that are not permanent members of the G20 are extended invitations to participate in the summits. The invitees are chosen by the host country. For the 2010 summits, for example, both Canada and South Korea invited Ethiopia, chair of NEPAD, Malawi, chair of the African Union, Vietnam, chair of ASEAN, and Spain. Canada also invited the Netherlands, while South Korea invited Singapore. Both Canada and South Korea invited 7 international organizations, the United Nations, the International Labour Organization, the World Bank, the International Monetary Fund, the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, the World Trade Organization, and the Financial Stability Board. As of 2014, leaders from the following nations have been invited to the G20 summits: Benin, Brunei, Cambodia, Chile, Colombia, Equatorial Guinea, Ethiopia, Kazakhstan, Malawi, Mauritania, Myanmar, the Netherlands, New Zealand, Nigeria, Senegal, Singapore, Spain, Switzerland, Thailand, the United Arab Emirates, and Vietnam.
Criticisms. Exclusivity of membership.
Although the G20 has stated that the group's economic weight and broad membership gives it a high degree of legitimacy and influence over the management of the global economy and financial system, its legitimacy has been challenged. With respect to the membership issue, U.S. President Barack Obama has noted the difficulty of pleasing everyone. Everybody wants the smallest possible group that includes them. So, if they're the 21st largest nation in the world, they want the G21, and think it's highly unfair if they have been cut out. A 2011 report for the Danish Institute for International Studies, entitled The G20 and Beyond, Towards Effective Global Economic Governance, criticized the G20's exclusivity, highlighting in particular its underrepresentation of the African continent. Moreover, the report stated that the G20's practice of inviting observers from non-member states is a mere concession at the margins, and does not grant the organization representational legitimacy. However, Global Policy stated in 2011 that the G20's exclusivity is not an insurmountable problem, and proposed mechanisms by which it could become more inclusive.
Norwegian perspective.
In a 2010 interview with Der Spiegel, Norwegian Foreign Minister Jonas Gahr Store called the G20 one of the greatest setbacks since World War II. Although Norway is a major developed economy and the seventh largest contributor to UN international development programs, it is not a member of the EU, and thus is not represented in the G20 even indirectly. Norway, like the other 173 nations not among the G20, has little or no voice within the group. Store characterized the G20 as a self-appointed group, arguing that it undermines the legitimacy of international organizations set up in the aftermath of World War II, such as the IMF, World Bank and United Nations.
Global Governance Group 3G, response.
In June 2010, Singapore's representative to the United Nations warned the G20 that its decisions would affect all countries, big and small, and asserted that prominent non-G20 members should be included in financial reform discussions. Singapore thereafter took a leading role in organizing the Global Governance Group, 3G, an informal grouping of 28 non-G20 countries, including several micronations and many third world countries, with the aim of collectively channeling their views into the G20 process more effectively. Singapore's chairing of the 3G was cited as a rationale for inviting Singapore to the November 2010 G20 summit in South Korea.
Foreign policy critiques.
The American magazine Foreign Policy has published articles condemning the G20, in terms of its principal function as an alternative to the supposedly exclusive G8. It questions the actions of some of the G20 members, and advances the notion that some nations should not have membership in the first place. For example, it has suggested that Argentina should be formally replaced in the group by Spain, because Spain's economy is larger. Furthermore, with the effects of the Great Recession still ongoing, the magazine has criticized the G20's efforts to implement reforms of the world's financial institutions, branding such efforts as failed. On June 14, 2012, an essay published by the National Taxpayers Union was forwarded to Foreign Policy, espousing a critical view of the application of G20 membership. The essay's authors, Alex Brill and James K. Glassman, used a numerical table with 7 criteria to conclude that Indonesia, Argentina, Russia and Mexico do not qualify for G20 membership, and that Switzerland, Singapore, Norway and Malaysia had overtaken some of the current members. However, the gap between current members Mexico and Russia and the lower-ranked entries in the author's list, Malaysia and Saudi Arabia, was only slight. Thus, it was concluded that there is no obvious group of 20 nations that should be included in the G20, and that fair and transparent metrics are essential, as they justify the difficult decisions that will be required in order to differentiate among similarly situated countries.
Wider concerns.
The G20's transparency and accountability have been questioned by critics, who call attention to the absence of a formal charter and the fact that the most important G20 meetings are closed-door. In 2001, the economist Francis Stewart proposed an Economic Security Council within the United Nations as an alternative to the G20. In such a council, members would be elected by the General Assembly based on their importance in the world economy, and the contribution they are willing to provide to world economic development. The cost and extent of summit-related security is often a contentious issue in the hosting country, and G20 summits have attracted protesters from a variety of backgrounds, including information activists, nationalists, and opponents of fractional reserve banking and crony capitalism. In 2010, The Toronto G20 summit sparked mass protests and rioting, leading to the largest mass arrest in Canadian history.
Current leaders.